It was nearing midnight in the quiet suburb of Fairview Glades, USA. Rows of immaculate houses stood under the soft glow of street lamps, their manicured lawns silhouetted against the faint moonlight. On this peaceful Monday evening, a single, deafening gunshot shattered the silence. Within minutes, the Harding residence, an elegant two-story brick home with a grand oak door, was swarmed by flashing red and blue lights. Police cruisers lined the curb while curious neighbors gathered behind the cordon tape, craning their necks for a glimpse of whatever horror had befallen the stately property. Officers moved swiftly up the front steps, armed with flashlights and drawn pistols. The front door stood ajar. Inside, the echo of hysteria bounced off the hardwood floors. A frantic female voice sobbed for help. Evelyn Harding, 48, appeared in the foyer, her beige sweater stained with crimson. Her eyes were wide with shock, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold up her cell phone. The operator's voice on the 911 call still rang through the speaker. Richard Harding, 54, the esteemed owner of a thriving logistics company, kneeled just beyond her. Over his shoulder, paramedics could see a young woman lying on the polished floor, motionless except for shallow, ragged breaths. As paramedics rushed forward, the officers quickly secured the scene. "Step away, sir," barked one of the patrolmen, but Richard wouldn't budge. He seemed paralyzed, tears streaking his face as he pressed his trembling hands on the young woman's chest. A single bullet hole marred the otherwise spotless living room rug. The paramedics lifted the young woman, her dark hair spread across the floor like a broken halo, onto a gurney. The swirl of voices, the crackle of police radios, and the frantic scramble of medical personnel created a dizzying tableau. From the corner of the room, Evelyn stood in stunned silence. Her gaze flicked between her husband and the injured young woman, as though she were trying to wake from a nightmare. Outside, the wail of an ambulance grew louder, then faded as it sped away, transporting the victim in critical condition. Detective Miriam Coulson, a seasoned investigator with the Fairview Police Department, arrived shortly thereafter. Tall, composed, and methodical, she surveyed the scene with measured steps. Blood droplets traced a trail across the glossy hardwood. A single shell casing glinted under the bright overhead light. As she questioned the shaken couple, snippets of their frantic explanations emerged. "She burst in," Evelyn claimed. I didn't shoot her." Meanwhile, Richard kept muttering, "I tried to stop it. I tried." In the hush that followed, Detective Coulson locked eyes with both husband and wife. Though they shared the same last name, there was no warmth in the air between them, only a suffocating tension. As for the young woman, the detective learned her name was Zara, and she was barely 22 years old. No one in the neighborhood had ever seen her before tonight. The hush soon gave way to the endless bustle of crime scene technicians, photographers, and uniformed officers. Yellow evidence markers popped up, illuminating blood spatters and half-finished glasses of wine on the coffee table. With each new detail, the picture grew more harrowing. Something had transpired here, something dark enough to turn a posh suburban household into a scene of violence and heartbreak. And thus, with one fatal shot, the Hardings' carefully curated existence began to crumble under the weight of secrets that, until this moment, had remained hidden behind walls of wealth and respectability. Long before the sirens pierced the calm night air, Richard Harding was known throughout Fairview Glades as a polished businessman with an uncanny knack for negotiation. He owned Harding Global Logistics, an enterprise that facilitated international shipping deals and corporate partnerships. His enviable status afforded him a luxurious lifestyle, a sprawling suburban house, a sleek black sports car, and a membership at the local country club. To the untrained eye, Richard was the embodiment of the American dream. But beneath that distinguished exterior lurked a man on the edge of a double life. Early in his career, Richard traveled often to the Middle East to forge lucrative partnerships, particularly in the rapidly expanding city of Dubai. It was there, under the neon glow of futuristic skyscrapers, that he encountered Zara. Zara was only 20 at the time, an aspiring entrepreneur from a traditional family who yearned to carve out her own path. She had a bright mind for business and an even brighter spark in her eyes that drew Richard in from the moment they exchanged pleasantries at a hotel bar. Their conversations began over coffee in plush lounges, but soon blossomed into secret dinners and weekend getaways. For Richard, Dubai represented excitement, ambition, and a reprieve from his mundane routine back in the States. When he stared across the city's shimmering skyline with Zara at his side, he felt younger, freed from the expectations of his suburban existence. He started sending Zara gifts, a designer handbag here, a piece of expensive jewelry there. In return, she offered him undivided attention and youthful admiration he no longer felt at home. Back in Fairview Glades, Evelyn Harding grew suspicious. For years, she had supported Richard's ambitions, hosting gala events for Harding Global Logistics and playing the gracious spouse at cocktail parties. But she noticed subtle changes. Richard became withdrawn, concealing his phone whenever she walked by. Her attempts at conversation were met with vague excuses or dismissive shrugs. When she stumbled upon a crumpled hotel receipt from a lavish Dubai restaurant, dated on a night Richard claimed to be in a business meeting, Evelyn's suspicions reached a boiling point. Despite the warning signs, she lacked proof, only a relentless anxiety that grew each time Richard packed his bags for business. Meanwhile, Richard and Zara's intimacy deepened. Their affair, initially fueled by curiosity, morphed into a turbulent passion. Zara wasn't content being a secret forever. She wanted a future, and she believed Richard could offer stability and love if he only found the courage to break free from his marriage. Eventually, Richard's carefully constructed world began to crack. His business partners started to notice his distracted behavior. Deadlines were missed, once sure deals fell through. Evelyn, with an intuition sharpened by years of marriage, confronted him about the affair. Richard denied everything, claiming she was overreacting. But lies have a way of unraveling, and his did so with astonishing speed. As the months wore on, Zara grew tired of waiting in the shadows. She decided to follow Richard to the States, convinced that once she arrived, he would finally leave Evelyn. With that impetuous decision, events were set into motion that no one could stop. By the time Zara stood on the Hardings' doorstep, demanding answers, the fissures in Richard's life had become full-blown cracks. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed under the weight of his deception. When Zara arrived in Fairview Glades, she expected a triumphant reunion. Instead, she found herself alone in a modest motel on the outskirts of town, staring out a dusty window at endless rows of identical strip malls. Richard had insisted she stay there until he could figure things out, but her patience was wearing thin. Night after night, she texted him, only to receive vague promises, "Soon, I'll fix everything." Meanwhile, back at the Harding residence, Evelyn's suspicions had solidified into certainty. She discovered credit card charges at Zara's motel. She found second phones hidden in Richard's office drawer. Each new revelation stoked the bonfire of betrayal, sending Evelyn's emotions into a whirlwind of anger, jealousy, and heartbreak. Conversations with Richard devolved into shouting matches, each leaving deeper scars on their 25-year marriage. Richard, caught between two worlds, tried to maintain an air of normalcy at Harding Global Logistics. In the boardroom, he showcased polished presentations and capital projections, but behind the scenes, he was crumbling. His personal phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls from Zara and accusatory texts from Evelyn. Work associates began whispering about his increasingly erratic behavior. Late one night, Zara ventured out of her motel room. She found the address of Richard's upscale home online and took a cab to the quiet, tree-lined street. She stood outside the Hardings' grand property, illuminated by soft porch lights, her heart pounding with anticipation. If Richard wouldn't come to her, she would go to him. She was done being a secret. When she rang the doorbell, she expected Richard to answer with relief. Instead, Evelyn opened the door. Their encounter crackled with tension. Evelyn recognized Zara from pictures on Richard's hidden phone. Zara, emboldened by rage and heartbreak, demanded to see Richard, demanded to know when he would fulfill his promises. Evelyn seethed, her voice trembling with the force of years wasted on a husband who had betrayed her. That night ended with Zara leaving in tears, threatened by the wrath of a scorned wife. Word spread quickly among the neighbors. Suspicious silhouettes, hushed arguments, a mysterious young woman lurking on the Hardings' porch. This wasn't the type of drama Fairview Glades was used to. Gossip circulated at grocery stores and PTA meetings, painting Evelyn as either a pitiful victim or a vengeful spouse, and Zara as an alluring stranger who had stolen a husband. Determined to take control, Zara contacted Richard's workplace the following day, leaving messages with his assistant. Her calls went unreturned. In desperation, she posted a handwritten letter through the Hardings' mail slot, pleading with Richard to meet her at a nearby cafe. It was a last-ditch effort. She felt she had sacrificed everything, her family's respect back home, her own dignity, and now, she had nowhere left to turn. That evening, Richard did appear at the cafe, pale, with exhaustion etched into every line on his face. They argued in hushed whispers, shielded by the cafe's dim lighting. Zara demanded public acknowledgement, a ring on her finger, or at least a plan. Richard argued for patience, claiming his hands were tied. Evelyn, he insisted, was on the verge of a breakdown. If he left her now, it would destroy everything he built. The tension between them was at a boiling point, and both knew it. Yet each refused to back down. Richard yearned to keep his illusions intact, while Zara wanted to step into the light. Soon, all the bottled-up anger, betrayal, and desperation would implode. No one realized just how cataclysmic the fallout would be, or how quickly it would arrive, until that infamous night in April. April 8, 2013, began quietly enough. Evelyn spent the morning pacing the living room, phone in hand, thoughts jumbled with suspicion. In the afternoon, Richard left work early, claiming he needed time to clear his head. Zara, unaware of the impending storm, also prepared to confront Richard one final time. By early evening, their paths converged in a confrontation that would forever change their lives. As dusk settled over Fairview Glades, Zara arrived at the Harding residence without warning. She had called Richard repeatedly, receiving no response. Fueled by heartbreak and frustration, she decided to show up unannounced. Stepping onto the porch, she inhaled sharply, determined to get answers. She knocked with urgency, each rap on the door echoed her desperation. Inside, Evelyn startled at the sound. She peered through the peephole to see Zara's solemn face. Her pulse quickened. No longer content with half-truths, Evelyn yanked open the door. Her voice trembled with a fury she could barely contain. "Leave us alone," she hissed. "You've done enough damage." Before Zara could respond, Richard appeared behind Evelyn, drawn by the commotion. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity before a storm. Zara shoved past Evelyn, tears brimming in her eyes. "You promised me," she cried, turning to Richard. "You said you'd fix this. But you've been ignoring me for days." Evelyn's fury boiled over. She cornered Zara in the living room, accusing her of seducing a married man. Zara shot back that Richard had lied to them both, casting the blame onto him. Caught in the crossfire, Richard tried to intervene, his voice trembling as he begged for calm. No one listened. Suddenly, Evelyn stormed into Richard's study, flinging open drawers. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tears streaking her cheeks. She yanked out a small revolver, a relic from Richard's father, kept under lock and key for protection. Zara stepped back in alarm, but her outrage fueled her. "What are you doing with that?" she asked, voice quavering between fear and defiance. With the gun in hand, Evelyn returned to the living room, pointing it shakily at Zara. Richard lunged forward, pleading with his wife to put the weapon down. In the confusion, Zara grabbed at Evelyn's arm, desperate to disarm her or push her away. No one could say for sure. A cacophony of screams erupted, drowning out reason. What happened next was a blur of panic. The revolver jerked in Evelyn's hand. A single shot thundered through the room. Zara stumbled back, clutching her chest in disbelief. A crimson stain quickly spread across her blouse, and her knees buckled. A heartbeat later, she collapsed onto the carpet, eyes wide in shock. For an agonizing second, time froze. Evelyn dropped the gun, its metallic clang echoing like a death knell. Richard rushed to Zara's side, pressing his hands to the wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. Evelyn stood rigid, tears streaming down her face. The sound of the gunshot rang in her ears, a haunting echo of regret and horror. When the 911 call finally connected, Evelyn's voice was barely coherent, filled with gasping sobs. "There's been a shooting, she's hurt, my husband's mistress, she's..." Each word tumbled out in a torrent of shock. As neighbors peered from behind curtains, sirens wailed in the distance, closing in on the Harding home. The collision course of lies, betrayal, and desperation had reached its inevitable, tragic crescendo. The aftermath of the shooting hung over Fairview Glades like a somber cloud. Detective Miriam Coulson led the investigation, determined to piece together a narrative from the shards of evidence left behind in the Hardings' living room. Yellow crime scene tape flapped in the breeze around the neatly trimmed bushes. Neighbors peered from their windows, gossiping in hushed tones as investigators packed cameras and evidence bags into vans. Inside the police station, the stark fluorescent lighting revealed every crease of tension on Richard and Evelyn's faces. They were questioned separately, each telling a fractured version of the truth. Evelyn insisted she grabbed the revolver only to scare Zara, never intending to fire it. Richard claimed he tried to stop both women but was too late. Zara, recovering in the hospital after emergency surgery, remained too weak for an immediate statement. Forensic analysts determined that only one bullet was discharged. It tore through Zara's shoulder and grazed her lung, miraculously missing her heart by mere millimeters. Gunpowder residue on Evelyn's hands suggested she had pulled the trigger, or at least had been close enough when the weapon discharged. However, faint traces of residue were also found on Zara's palms, implying a desperate struggle. Days later, Zara mustered enough strength to speak with Detective Coulson. Her voice, raspy and edged with pain, recounted the horrific night. She denied lunging for the gun, insisting Evelyn had aimed it directly at her. Yet, she admitted to fighting back when she feared Evelyn would shoot her outright. Her testimony underscored the chaotic nature of the conflict, no clear lines of victim and aggressor, only tragedy fueled by betrayal. Public opinion swirled like a storm. Some castigated Evelyn as an unstable wife who couldn't handle rejection. Others accused Zara of knowingly entangling herself with a married man. As for Richard, many saw him as the catalyst for the entire calamity, a middle-aged man chasing thrills without regard for the devastation his actions would cause. After weeks of legal deliberations, the district attorney charged Evelyn with aggravated assault. Zara, still grappling with physical and emotional scars, found herself at a crossroads. Should she demand harsher charges or let the courts handle matters as they saw fit? Torn by exhaustion and heartbreak, she cooperated with the prosecution's lesser charge, seeking to move on from the nightmare. Evelyn pleaded guilty to a reduced count, claiming she never intended to kill. The judge sentenced her to probation and mandatory counseling, an outcome that sparked controversy throughout the community. Richard Harding faced his own reckoning, a high-profile divorce, the collapse of his reputation, and the self-inflicted punishment of knowing he had dragged two women into a devastating conflict. His once thriving business took a massive hit as clients withdrew contracts, wary of the scandal and the final aftermath, Zara chose to return to Dubai, seeking solace with her family and leaving behind the carnage of Fairview Glades. Her dreams of carving out a new life in the United States were drowned by the bloodstains on the Hardings' living room rug. Evelyn, separated and alone, grappled with the guilt of nearly taking another woman's life, haunted by questions of how she let her rage reach such a lethal point. Richard, stripped of illusions, stood in the doorway of his now almost empty house, staring at the space where Zara collapsed. He thought of the wasted opportunities to come clean, to salvage some honesty before deceit rotted everything from within. The hush in the rooms echoed with memories of bitter arguments, tears, and shattered glass. Like any true crime story, the threads of love, betrayal, and violence were woven too tightly to unravel cleanly. One impulsive decision led to another, culminating in a single thunderous shot that exposed the fault lines of a broken marriage, a forbidden affair, and a community's thirst for scandal. The Harding tragedy would forever remain a cautionary tale, that sometimes, even in the quietest suburbs, the most dangerous secrets lie just behind the front door.